Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Intro to 3D Coat series. In this video, we're just going to do a really quick walkthrough of the user interface. When you first open 3D Coat, you're presented with this menu in the center of the screen. These are really just quick jumps to the different workflows that you want to get into. For example, with 3D Coat, there's so many different workflows that you can do in this application. For example, if you want to do sculpting, you have both a surface sculpting or a voxel sculpting workflow that you can jump directly into. Or if you want to do painting, you can paint through a normal map per pixel or paint with direct displacement, and even vertex and p-text painting. There's also modeling and 3D workflows, as well as UV and retopology workflows as well, and others that are on this list. Now, this menu only pops up in the beginning. If you were to close this menu, you can access any of these workflows through this pull down in the very upper left corner. You'll find them here. 3D Coat refers to these as rooms. So you're either in the painting room or in the sculpt room or the 3D print room, modeling, and so on. Your brush tools are all laid out here in the tools panel, and you have your color swatches. And like Photoshop, you have a foreground and a background color, and you can flip between the two. Depending on what tool you pick, for example, I have a brush selected, I can choose what style of brush I would like to work with. So that would be right up in here. So you can see right now this is showing me that this is a non-pressure sensitive brush, but then I can switch to other brushes, one that might taper, one that fades and tapers, and so on. There's even marquee brushes and stamp brushes and so on. And we'll go through all of these in a future video. And if you're wondering where are your alphas for your brushes, 3D Coat does have a set of presets, preset panels docked to the upper right, and you just hover over them and they will reveal these different panels. Everything that you see in this workspace is super customizable, meaning that you can grab any panel, move it around, dock it. You can dock it anywhere you want. I can dock it off to the side. I can place it right up on top, so it takes the top section. And even you can dock it into a tab in one panel. So now my texture editor will live here. Okay, I just put it back. But you can access any panel that you want and dock it in place. So for example, we just showed these presets that are off to the side. Now, I typically don't like to go to these all the time. I feel it's a little slower for me. And also, if you hover away from it, it goes away, which is kind of really nice in some aspects. Like if I just want to grab something really quick, click and then move, it frees up my workspace. But I like to see everything as I'm working. So I've created my own workspace and saved that off. And now with 3D Coat, you can customize your workspace per room, which is really nice. So you're customizing for the context of the work that you're going to be doing. And you can always pull them all up at once. So I can save one page layout, which would be just for this room only, the paint room. And then I can go to another room and customize that. For example, I can go to the sculpt room and I can then make some customizations for that independently. And this will save my customization layouts. So then if I wanted to restore one of the page layouts, then I can go to my list of paged layouts. But let's say you've gone through each of these rooms and you've customized it the way you want. You can save each room's layout separately, or you can just save it all at one time through the workspace. So if I wanted to, I have my own workspace for all the setups. If I want to open those, I can restore workspace and then open my workspace. So now I've restored all the workspaces that I've set up for each of these rooms. So if I go to my paint room, I have my brushes, and I have my brush options panel, which is like the Photoshop options panel where I can select any particular alpha, and then I can then apply some behaviors like jitter, rotation, scales, and even the space frequency when I'm brushing, so I can have it dabbing or spaced apart. So super flexible. But what's really cool about all of this is that everything that you see here, for the most part, can be set up as a hotkey. So an example of that is maybe I just want to access my brush, for example, or a pencil or airbrush. You'll see that if you look in this tooltip, you can define a hotkey for just that particular brush. And if I want, I can even hover over, for example, a stencil. Maybe I have a favorite stencil like this. I can set up a hotkey that will initiate that stencil for me. This is true for just about anything. If I like a particular material that I like to use a lot, I can hover over it and I can set a hotkey for that as well. You can find another set of tools just right up on top. These are things like if you wanted to change your brush radius or the fall off, you can decide to filter out between depth, color, and glossiness, meaning you can paint with all three at one time at once, or you can decide to turn certain channels off as you're painting. So in this case, where I turn depth and gloss off, when I paint, I'm only going to paint with color. And you can do this in any combination. I can also change the depth of my brush. For example, if I'm painting a normal map or a real displacement, I can affect the strength of the depth that I'm painting down, as well as opacity, color opacity, and roughness and metalness. Super handy stuff over here. And if you hover your mouse up into the viewport up in this upper right, you'll see that there's another set of quick tools. Like your grid, I can turn on and off the grid. I can change into orthographic or perspective mode. I can even reset my view to the home view. So let's just move out a bit, rotate, and now I can set it back to my home. And I'm going to go through these in another video to show you an example of how these are working. And there's your camera controls over here, meaning that you can change your views of the camera. You can change your background theme directly from here. And you can even save and load camera presets as you're working. If you have a set and you want to look through a particular view, you can set that and save that out at any time and load it back in. And depending on what tool that you're using, for example, if I click on the fill tool, there's a tool options that pops up. This is not available for everything. Some things just don't have options, but for the ones that do, you'll see these options pop up here. So for the fill tool, an example would be that I can fill with color, which would be, it would be dependent on whether I have depth, color, and glossiness selected. If I have all three on, it will fill with all three channels. I can also fill with an eraser. If I wanted to quickly erase a section that's on a particular mesh, I can then just fill with an eraser and click on that part of the mesh, and it'll just clean everything off of it all at once. You can also fill on a layer, or you can fill in a UV set or a material set. So if you're working with UDIMs, you might have 10, 15, 20 different UV tiles. You can actually fill any one of those UDIMs on its own just through here. Or you can fill on a per object selection. Your texture editor panel is basically your UV panel. So for example, let me just go ahead and bring in a simple object like this shader ball. Now you'll see I have my UV editor over here, and you can see that this yellow border, this yellow square, is my 0 to 1 space. And if I hover my cursor over any of the islands, it turns into a paintbrush. And this just means that I can paint in the UV space or paint directly in the model space. To tumble around, you left click in this empty space and you can tumble. If I move my cursor over the object, you see it turns into a brush. And now if I were to left click, I'm actually painting on the model. If I right click outside of the model, I'm zooming in and out. And again, if I hover my cursor over an object and I right click, now I'm going to control the brush influence. So for example, if I'm right clicking and I move left and right, I change the scale of the brush. And if I right click and move up and down, I'm going to change the depth of that brush. So if I reduce the depth all the way down and brush, you'll see I have no effect. If I bump it up a little bit and brush, now I have an effect. And if I bump it up a lot, then it gets really extreme. If I hold middle mouse and move, I'm panning around the scene. And that's true even if I'm over the object in middle mouse, I'm still panning. So that's a constant. Just like Photoshop, you have a foreground and a background color swatch, and you can flip between them or change the order of them just by clicking on this little flip icon. And again, I can put a hotkey to that, so I can just hit a key and it'll flip my colors. Okay, and we also have, or I have docked here, is a paint object. This is like if you're working in a 3D application, you might have an outliner. This is going to list all your meshes. 3D Coat has that. It's under Paint Objects. So you'll have your list of meshes in this Paint Objects panel. And if you hit the little eye, you can hide it or show it. You can simply lock any particular mesh. So if you were to try to paint on that mesh, it won't let you. So that way you can protect yourself from accidentally painting any particular object in your list. And if you hit the X, it will just remove that object from your scene. .3D also has a really nice layer system, very similar to Photoshop. So let's go ahead and bring that object back in. And there we go. The layer system works very much like Photoshop. So anything I do in this layer, and let's add another layer. And I'm going to change my brush. And I'll just flip that color. And now I will put that on top. Everything I do, depending on the layer that's highlighted, it gets recorded to just that layer. And you can choose what happens to this layer as well. So as you see, I painted with some depth, or this is really a normal map, as you can see off to the side. If I wanted to change the effect of that normal map, each layer has its own set of layer options. So for example, I can take the depth of this particular layer and I can reduce it or remove it or increase it. I have separate controls. So let's put that back to 100. And I can also start to fade the color away or get rid of the color. So I'm only left with the depth and the roughness. I can now control the roughness separately. And now it's just the depth. So there's controls independent to what layer you're working on. So for example, I only have depth. And if I go back to my layer 1, you'll see that the settings are preserved for that particular layer. When I go back to my other one, my settings are recorded for that layer. You can also create groups by clicking the group icon, and like Photoshop, you can drag a layer under the group, and now that layer is preserved under that group. Actually, I'm going to grab this layer as well and drag it into the group. So now they're both under the group and they have different settings for the layers. I can go to the group layer itself and just do an overall effect on that group layer, and that's going to apply to everything under the group in one shot. The other thing you can do as well is you can link materials to your layers. So I can create this material as an example. So now that I've selected this material, I can say to attach it to that current layer, keeping that material alive basically. So if I wanted to modify it later, I can still change it without having to reapply everything back on to that layer if I've done a bunch of work. So it kind of leaves everything in a non-destructive state. 3D Coat has really great material workflows. You can, when you select a material, you get a smart material preview. When you open this preview, it's basically a render. So if I were to hover this over here and let go, it's going to give me a preview of what this material might look like. And it's right now it's respecting my filters. So let me turn depth and glossiness on. And you can see now this material is being previewed on that surface. So I can move it anywhere I want and it'll fill it. I can size this up. So it's larger, and now I can just hover it over the whole material. I can go through and cycle through the different materials I have available and see what they look like. And then when you do choose a material, you get this little panel up here, which gives you some controls. I can reset the scale, and I can change the tiling effect of that material, as well as moving that material in space and choosing whether it's being cube mapped or if I'm going to render it from a camera. And right now this material is just a 1x1, so it's a 0 to 1 space. But at any time I can decide to choose to tile it, and now it's being tiled across the entire thing. You can paint inside the preview. So if I were to start painting, I'm now painting this material through a camera projection. So if I were to turn this off, you can see that I just painted that in this projection. And if I turn this, you can see how it's being projected. It's smearing off to the side. Let's go back to that. And now if I wanted to change that to cube mapping, which it's set to by default, change the scale. And now if I were to paint, no matter where I'm painting, it won't stretch, even if I paint on the glancing angles. So it's painting on all sides properly. You can see what you've painted on in your UV channel. What's nice about this as well is you can decide, maybe you just want to fill some area. So I might want to fill this particular channel. So I can choose the material and then fill that and fill that. So you can see now when I close this preview, that I filled the upper and bottom shell. And I used the UV map to fill it. It's really nice that you have the flexibility of working in 3D and 2D. If you need more space, you can pull the UV editor out and make it larger. You can dock it to the side and give yourself more space, like so. And now you can work in your 2D and 3D painting style. So that's just a peek of how 3D Coat works and how you navigate through the workspace and how you can customize the workspace to your liking. So that wraps up this video, and I'll see you in the next